At my mother's funeral, my stepbrother grabbed my wrist and demanded the keys to his house. I told him Mom had already settled that this morning. He laughed until I played the last 47 seconds of her final voicemail. Then he tried to grab my phone. The locksmith's van was still idling in my mother's driveway when I pulled in from the cemetery, its orange hazard lights blinking against the wet pavement. I sat behind the wheel for a full 10 seconds before I understood what I was looking at. Kyle was standing on the porch in his funeral suit, holding a business card out to a man in a gray polo shirt, pointing at the front door the way you'd give directions to your own house. My mother had been in the ground for exactly 90 minutes. I didn't know yet that the woman waiting in the locksmith's passenger seat worked for a check-cashing outlet 2 towns over, or that a 47-second voicemail sitting unheard on my phone was about to matter more than anything either of us said on that porch. I'd been driving to my mother's house almost every day for nearly 2 years by then, ever since her diagnosis turned from "we caught it early" into 6 months, maybe less. I worked as a physical therapist at an outpatient clinic 20 minutes away, and I'd rearranged my caseload twice in 8 months so I could be there on infusion days. Then again, when infusion days turned into just days. Joanne Voss had married my stepfather Walter when I was 11, and when Walter died 6 years ago, the house on Averill Street had passed to her outright, folded into a trust Linda had drawn up at the time, a fact Kyle never quite accepted, even though he'd been an adult with his own apartment for a decade by then. He'd visited maybe twice a year after that, birthdays and a stiff hour at Thanksgiving, until the last few months, when he started showing up with flowers and expensive throw blankets and a new habit of asking her gently whether she'd thought about the house, always phrased like he was worried about her, never like he wanted anything. I'd learned the rhythms of that last year by heart. Her chipped blue mug rinsed and set by the sink, the neighbor's dog barking at 4 every afternoon like clockwork, her grocery list half finished on the counter, eggs, the good coffee, call Linda, because writing more than 3 items at a time had started to exhaust her. 6 weeks before she died, Kyle had shown up unannounced with a Home Depot bag, said he was fixing the porch railing, and spent 40 minutes in the house alone while I ran to the pharmacy. I found a stack of her bank mail sitting open on the counter that evening, rubber banded together like someone had been sorting it, and when I asked her about it, she just said Kyle had been helping her stay organized and changed the subject. I let it go. I told myself it was nothing, a grown man being thoughtful finally at the worst possible time to start. Linda Kessler was the estate attorney my mother had used for 20-some years, ever since Walter's will. In the last month, my mother's visits to Linda's office had gone from once a year to 3 times in 5 weeks, and when I asked why, she'd just patted my hand and said, "Housekeeping, sweetheart," in a voice that didn't sound like housekeeping at all. I still remember the exact Tuesday she told me the diagnosis had changed. She'd made tea neither of us drank, set out 2 mugs, hers chipped, mine not, and told me the numbers before I'd even sat down, like ripping a bandage off fast was a kindness. She apologized that day for what the next year was going to cost me, the hours, the sleep, the version of my late 20s I'd never get back, and I told her to stop apologizing for being sick, and she laughed and said that was exactly the kind of thing she'd raised me to say. I think about that Tuesday more than I think about the funeral. It's the ordinary ones that stay. By the time I got the locksmith to leave, I told him calmly that the woman standing next to me held the only key that mattered, and he could bill whoever had called him. The house had filled with relatives balancing paper plates of deli sandwiches, and Kyle had cornered me by the coat closet before I'd even taken off my jacket. "We need to talk about the house," he said. Not, "I'm sorry for your loss," not, "How are you holding up?" Just that. "Kyle, she's been dead for 2 hours. Which is exactly why we need to talk about it now, before this turns into some circus. He grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but hard enough that my stomach dropped and a few heads turned near the punch bowl. "I'm the one who's actually family here, Dana. The real son. I'm not going to stand around while you play house with something that was never yours." I pulled my arm free. My hands were shaking and I hated that he could see it. "Mom already settled that this morning," I said. Before she died, he laughed. A short, ugly bark of a laugh, the kind meant to carry across a room. "Settled it? How?" "She didn't have a will meeting this morning, Dana. She had a 9 a.m. appointment with hospice." I didn't answer him with words. I pulled out my phone, found the voicemail my mother had left me at 8:14 that morning. One she'd left, hospice nurse later told me, 20 minutes before she lost the strength to speak in full sentences. And I hit play, right there by the coat closet, loud enough for the room to hear. "Dana, honey, it's Mom. I want you to know I went ahead and did it. The papers we signed with Linda this morning, at the house. They're done. They're filed. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want you carrying it. I love you. I'm so proud of..." The message cut off there. 47 seconds exactly. Time-stamped 8:14 a.m., the morning she died. For 1 second, Kyle's face went the color of the paper plates. Then something in him snapped back into place and the laugh came again, thinner this time. "That's not a will," he said. "That's not anything. That's a sick woman rambling into a phone. You think a voicemail holds up in probate court?" He reached for my phone, fast, and I stepped back so hard I knocked a framed photo off the side table. "Give me that, delete it. That doesn't prove anything except that she was confused at the end and you know it." "Don't touch me again," I said, and for the first time in my life, my stepbrother actually looked at me like he was calculating something. The room had gone strange and quiet around us in the particular way a room does when everyone is pretending not to listen. Someone had left a casserole dish half uncovered on the counter behind me, foil peeled back, steam still rising off it like nothing in the world was wrong. My cousin's toddler was crying somewhere near the stairs. Uncle Ray cleared cleared his throat too loudly and asked if anyone wanted more coffee, and 3 people said yes at once, grateful for anything else to talk about. I stood there in my mother's kitchen with my wrist still faintly stinging, holding a phone with my dead mother's voice still warm in it, and I understood, in a distant and clinical way, that whatever came next between Kyle and me was not going to be small, and it was not going to be quick. The morning after the funeral, my Aunt Colette called me before 9, her voice already careful in a way that told me Kyle had gotten to her first. "He says you humiliated him in front of the whole family," she said, playing some recording, waving your phone around like a courtroom drama. "Dana, the man just lost his father's wife. Couldn't it have waited?" I told myself she just didn't have the full picture yet, that once she understood what the voicemail actually meant, she'd see it differently. I drove to the house that afternoon to start sorting through my mother's things, and found Kyle's car already in the driveway again, the front door unlocked. He was in the garage with 2 of the moving boxes I'd flattened and left by the recycling, loading Walter's old tool chest and a set of patio furniture into the back of his SUV. "These were my dad's," he said, before I could even ask. "Nobody's arguing me out of my own father's tools. Nobody's arguing you out of anything, Kyle. Just ask me next time instead of coming in when I'm not here. It's not like the locks are new," he said, and smiled like that was a joke between us instead of a threat. I watched him drive off with a truck bed full of things that weren't, strictly only Walter's. A lawnmower my mother had bought 2 years after Walter died, a ladder with her initials sharpied on the handle. My hands were shaking again by the time I got back inside, and I stood in the kitchen for a long minute telling myself it was just grief making him grabby, that once probate sorted the actual house out, the small stuff wouldn't matter. It was the first of several times I'd tell myself that, and the first of several times I'd turn out to be wrong. 2 days later, a courier delivered an envelope to my apartment, an emergency probate objection filed by an attorney named Grant Michelson on Kyle's behalf, asking the court to disregard any purported oral or recorded modification to the decedent's estate plan as legally void hearsay. The filing ran 9 pages, dense with phrases like purported testamentary intent and decedent's diminished capacity in the final period. And somewhere on page 4, Grant Michelson had written that I had seized upon a grieving woman's confused final utterance to manufacture a claim against a legitimate heir. I read that sentence standing in my kitchen with my coat still on, my throat going so tight I had to set the pages down and walk away for a full minute before I could pick them back up. It wasn't the legal language that got to me. It was being called confused, and my mother being called confused, by a man who knew exactly what she'd meant. I sat at the table rereading it anyway, my coffee going cold, telling myself this was just Kyle being Kyle, grief dressed up as greed, nothing more. I called Linda Kessler that afternoon. "I need to know what that voicemail was about," I told her. "What did she actually sign that morning?" There was a pause on the line I didn't like. "Dana, I think you and I need to sit down in person," Linda said. "There are some things in your mother's file I haven't been able to tell you yet because frankly, I only understood the full shape of it myself 2 days ago." I sat across from Linda in her office the next morning, 22 years practicing estate law. Her diplomas from 2 schools I recognized hung slightly crooked behind her desk, and she slid a manila folder across to me instead of a will amendment. "Your mother didn't come to my office that morning to change her will," Linda said. "The house was already yours under the existing trust, has been for 3 years. What she came to sign was a sworn addendum to an ongoing fraud complaint. Your mother believed, and I now have reason to believe she was right, that Kyle forged her signature on a home equity loan against the Avril Street property 8 months ago." My stomach dropped so fast I had to put a hand flat on the desk. "A loan? How much?" $150,000, Linda said, "dispersed directly to an account in Kyle's name." I sat there for a long moment, not breathing, the fluorescent light humming overhead, my mother's chipped blue mug flashing stupidly through my mind for no reason at all. She never said anything to me. She let me think that voicemail meant she'd fixed things for me. She let me believe I was the reason she went in that morning. "You were," Linda said gently, "just not in the way you assumed. She wasn't protecting the house for you, Dana. She was protecting you from ever having to be the one who found this out and had to decide what to do about it. She wanted it already decided, already in motion, before it landed on you at all. She didn't tell me any of it. She didn't want you carrying it," Linda said, echoing the voicemail without meaning to. She said that to me almost word for word more than once. She'd noticed the equity draw on a statement in March, asked her banker about it, and started quietly pulling records herself before she was too sick to keep going. Bank statements, the notary's business license, old photos of Kyle's handwriting next to hers. There's a folder of it in here, all in her handwriting, dated and organized the way she used to organize everything. That morning, she wasn't finalizing a will. She was giving me a signed statement identifying the loan as fraudulent, so it would exist on paper the day she reported it, not after, when it would just be my word against his. I told myself, at first, that this had to be a misunderstanding. A home equity line Walter had set up years ago that Kyle had simply inherited access to. Something explainable. I wanted it to be explainable. In the meantime, a family group chat that had gone mostly quiet since the funeral suddenly filled up with messages from Kyle, none addressed to me directly, all clearly meant for me to see. Some people can't grieve without turning it into a lawsuit, and Mom deserved better than a daughter who couldn't even let her be buried in peace before going after her family for money. Aunt Colette sent a single crying face emoji under the second one. I stared at that emoji longer than I'd like to admit, feeling something close to shame for a fraud I hadn't hadn't even confirmed yet, before I made myself put the phone down and remember that I hadn't accused anyone of anything in that chat. Kyle had done all the accusing on his own. 2 weeks later, Linda's office subpoenaed the loan file from Cascade Trust Bank, and what came back wasn't explainable at all. My mother's signature on the loan documents, dated 8 months earlier, next to a notary stamp from an office Linda had never heard of, on a date my mother's own calendar showed her at a chemotherapy appointment 40 minutes away. The bank's own fraud department had flagged the signature themselves, before we'd even asked. A routine internal review had caught a mismatch in pen pressure and letter formation weeks before my mother died, and a hold notice had gone out to a mailing address that, it turned out, wasn't my mother's address at all. Linda walked me through the subpoenaed file that same afternoon, sliding a printed exception report across her desk. Someone filed a change of address request on this loan account 4 days after it originated, she said. Every statement and hold notice after that got routed to a P.O. box registered under a different name than the borrower on file. That's not an accident, Dana. That's someone making sure the one person who could catch this never saw a piece of paper telling her to look. Whose name was on the P.O. box? I asked, though I already knew. Kyle Voss, Linda said. He redirected her mail, I said out loud, half to Linda, half to no one, my hands not quite steady on the edge of her desk. He set it up so she'd never see a single notice. I called Kyle that night, some stupid, hopeful part of me still hoping there'd be an answer that made this a mistake instead of what it plainly was. He picked up on the second ring, already defensive. I heard you've been calling banks, he said. Kyle, whose account did $150,000 land in 8 months ago? Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, you don't know what you're talking about. I have the wire records. I have the P.O. box, too. Get a lawyer then, he said, and hung up. I got a lawyer. I already had one. Linda's fraud investigator contact at Cascade Trust was a woman named Priya Nakamura, 14 years leading the bank's internal fraud investigations unit, the kind of person who talked in flat, careful sentences that made you trust every word twice as much because there was no performance in them. She met with Linda and me in a windowless conference room on the bank's 9th floor, a laptop and a thick folder open in front of her. Once your attorney's subpoena came in, we traced the loan disbursement all the way through, Priya said. $150,000 moved from the home equity line into an account under Kyle Voss's name, then out again in smaller transfers over about 5 months, $11,000 here, $8,000 there, to a payment processor connected to an offshore sportsbook registered under his name and email address. We see this pattern more than people think. It's rarely one big theft. It's usually someone who's already underwater trying to bail out a hole they can't talk about. How deep a hole? I asked. Deep enough that he needed the house liquidated fast, Priya said, which is likely why he moved on the locks the same day as the funeral. If probate drags, the loan stays anchored to a property he doesn't legally control. If he can force a quick sale before anyone looks closely, the loan gets satisfied and the fraud never has to surface. Linda brought in a forensic document examiner, Owen Braddock, 19 years certified, the kind of quiet, precise man who spoke about ink pressure and stroke direction the way other people talk about the weather. He compared the loan signature against 6 verified samples of my mother's handwriting spanning a decade, including a birthday card I hadn't been able to throw away, laying them side by side under a lit magnifier in Linda's conference room while I watched over his shoulder and tried to breathe evenly. Your mother had a distinctive hitch in her lowercase j, he said, almost gently, tapping the exemplar. See how it hooks back left before the tail. This signature doesn't hook. Whoever wrote this was working from memory of the shape, not the muscle memory of actually writing it thousands of times. His written report ran 11 pages and ended in one sentence I read 4 times. In this examiner's professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, the questioned signature was not produced by the same hand as the known exemplars. I sat in my car in the parking garage under Linda's building for almost 20 minutes after I read that sentence, not driving anywhere, just breathing. I called my coworker O'Dallas, the only person at the clinic I'd told any of this to, and when she picked up, I couldn't get more than "he forged it. They proved he forged it" out before my voice gave up entirely. She stayed on the phone with me anyway, not saying much, just letting me sit in the quiet with the ignition off until I could trust my hands enough to drive. Because the loan had crossed the line from a family dispute into potential forgery, Priya's fraud unit flagged the file for referral, and a county financial crimes detective named Marisol Fenn, 11 years working white-collar cases, called to schedule a formal statement. I sat across from her in a gray office building downtown and answered questions for 90 minutes. When I'd first heard the voicemail, when I'd first seen the loan documents, whether anyone had coached me on what to say, she recorded everything, took the original voicemail file off my phone under a documented chain of custody so it couldn't later be challenged as altered, and told me, in the same flat, unhurried tone Priya used, that the file would sit open pending the probate outcome, that a criminal forgery charge, if it came to that, carried real weight in this state, and that it was common for these to resolve through restitution rather than prosecution once the money side got sorted, but that the choice on whether to push for charges would ultimately sit with the district attorney's office, not with me. 2 weeks after that, an emergency hearing was set in probate court in front of Judge Everett Sloan, 11 years on the bench, a man with the flat, unhurried patience of someone who had clearly sat through every possible version of a family destroying itself over money. The courtroom smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper, and Kyle sat 2 tables over in a suit I didn't recognize, not looking at me once. Grant Michael Mickelson stood up first and argued that the voicemail was inadmissible, that grief had made an elderly, sedated woman say things she didn't mean, that my mother's housekeeping comment to me proved nothing about fraud and everything about a family in disarray inventing accusations to seize an asset. He asked the court to dismiss the fraud allegation outright as an attempt to relitigate a valid loan through the back door of a probate dispute. Linda stood and, without raising her voice, told the judge that a forensic document examiner's report was already in preparation and would be filed within the week, along with sworn documentation from the decedent herself, identifying the loan as fraudulent the same morning she died. Judge Sloan listened to both without expression and said only, "Counsel, once that report is filed, I'll want to see it before I rule on anything else in this case. We'll proceed accordingly," and set a follow-up hearing for 2 weeks out. Those 2 weeks were the worst of it. The loan, it turned out, hadn't been paid on since the month my mother died. Kyle had simply stopped, betting correctly that no one would notice fast enough, and Cascade Trust's servicing department, following procedure with no idea a fraud investigation was underway on their own product, sent a notice threatening to force a sale of the Averill Street house within 30 days to recover the delinquent balance. I stood in my mother's kitchen reading that letter with my throat so tight I could barely swallow, the chipped blue mug still sitting by the sink exactly where she'd left it. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I understood that I could lose the house not because Kyle had a legitimate claim to it, but because of the fraud itself, moving faster than the court that was supposed to expose it. I called the servicing line that afternoon and spent 40 minutes on hold before a representative told me, in the bored voice of someone reading a script, that the notice was standard procedure once an account hit 90 days delinquent, that a fraud flag on the file hadn't yet cleared internal review, and that unless the balance was brought current or a court order intervened, the file would proceed to the next stage automatically. No amount of explaining that my dead mother's forged signature was the thing generating the debt moved the timeline forward or back by a single day. I hung up and sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, my heart hammering, and for a few minutes I let myself imagine just giving up, letting Kyle have the house, the fight, all of it, if it meant this feeling would stop. Linda talked me off that ledge over the phone 20 minutes later. "I know what this feels like right now," she said, "but a servicing department doesn't know your mother's name or your stepbrother's face. It only knows a spreadsheet. We don't fight the spreadsheet. We get in front of the person who can override it." She filed an emergency motion the same afternoon to stay the servicer's action pending the fraud finding. Judge Sloan granted a 10-day freeze, no more. 10 days to get everything in front of me at once, Linda told me, her voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. Bank corroboration, the forensic report, your mother's sworn addendum, Detective Fenn's intake statement. If we're not ready when that freeze lifts, the servicer moves forward regardless of what the fraud case eventually finds. On the 6th day of the freeze, a realtor called to schedule an appraisal walkthrough on the servicer's behalf, cheerful and entirely unaware she was standing in the middle of a fraud case, and I had to stand in my mother's front hallway and explain twice that no one would be walking through anything until a judge said otherwise. She apologized, confused, and said the request had come from the account on file. Kyle's forwarding address, still active, still routing paperwork straight to him weeks after the P.O. box had supposedly been closed. I called Linda the second I hung up, my voice not quite steady. "He's still trying to move it," I said. "Even now." Linda didn't sound surprised. "Then let's make sure the next thing that moves is his case," she said. I didn't sleep much in those 10 days. I kept picturing men in gray polo shirts standing on that porch again, this time with a realtor's lockbox instead of a new set of keys, and I kept the chipped blue mug in my own cabinet at home after that, just in case. The reconvened hearing ran less than an hour, though it felt like most of a day. Linda laid it out piece by piece. Owen Braddock's signature analysis, entered as Exhibit 6. Priya Nakamura's written corroboration from Cascade Trust's fraud unit, tracing the transfers to the sportsbook account, entered as Exhibit 7. Detective Fenn's intake statement, confirming the chain of custody on the original voicemail, entered as Exhibit 8, and the notarized addendum my mother had signed at 8:14 that final morning, establishing a clear record from her hand to Linda's file the same day she died. Judge Sloan read through the forensic report slowly, adjusting his glasses twice, then looked up, not at Linda, but directly at Kyle. "Mr. Voss, your own counsel filed to have a voicemail thrown out as unreliable," he said. "I'd like to hear how you explain a forensic document examiner's finding that your stepmother's signature on a $150,000 loan wasn't produced by her hand at all, and a fraud detective's open file with your name on it." Kyle's face had gone gray. Beside him, Grant Michelson leaned over and murmured something I couldn't hear, and whatever he said made Kyle's jaw tighten before he answered. "I never meant for it to end up like this," Kyle said, and his voice cracked in a way I'd never once heard from him in 18 years. "I was drowning. I needed the money for 2 weeks tops, and I was going to pay it back before she ever— I didn't think she'd— He stopped. "I forged it. I signed her name." The room went very quiet. Somewhere behind me, I heard someone exhale. Gone, I thought, looking at him, the stepbrother I'd known since I was 11 years old, standing there admitting to something no amount of real son talk could undo. Gone, just like that. Grant Michelson, to his credit, didn't try to spin it from there. Facing a signed forensic finding and an open detective's file that could still be walked over to the district attorney's office that same week, he negotiated, instead of fought, full repayment of the fraudulent loan balance on a court-supervised schedule, an immediate and permanent forfeiture surrender of any claim against the estate, and a signed admission entered into the probate record, all in exchange for Linda agreeing, on my instruction, not to push Detective Fenn's file toward a criminal forgery charge. I sat with that decision for a long moment before I gave it. Part of me wanted the charge, wanted a courtroom full of strangers to hear exactly what he'd done to a dying woman. But Linda reminded me quietly that restitution meant money back into the estate now, not years from now, and that the forensic report and his own admission would exist in the record either way. Proof enough for anyone who ever asked what happened, without a trial dragging on for a year. Judge Sloan accepted the terms, entered the notarized addendum as controlling, and confirmed the Avril Street house as mine, free and clear, under the existing trust that had named me all along. Kyle didn't look at me on his way out of the courtroom. He'd spent that whole reception calling himself the real son, the one who actually belonged in that house. And in the end, the only thing that had actually belonged to him was the forgery. I stood on the courthouse steps afterward for a long time, longer than I needed to, watching traffic move through the crosswalk like it was any other Tuesday. Linda squeezed my shoulder once and told me to go home and sleep, and for the first time in months, when I got back to Avril Street that evening, I let myself sit in my mother's kitchen without checking a single email. Aunt Colette called the week after the hearing, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, and apologized for the crying face emoji, for believing the version of events that was easiest to believe at a funeral. I told her it was fine. It mostly is. A year later, Priya Nakamura called me out of courtesy, more than obligation, to let me know that Cascade Trust's internal fraud settlement had quietly absorbed half of what Kyle still owed after his own asset liquidation, covered the rest, and that, as part of the bank's resolution, he'd been permanently barred from borrowing against any account still connected to his father's name. It's a detail I don't think Kyle knows I have. I keep my mother's chipped blue mug by the sink now, in my own kitchen, and some mornings I still reach for the phone before I remember there's no voicemail left to hear. The real son, it turned out, was the one who never needed to prove it.